Britain is regarded as a bit of a laughing stock, quite frankly. It's regarded, in a way, in the 30 plus years I've been in America, in a more negative and frankly disdainful way than I think Britain has been viewed at any point, probably in the last 75 years. Another Prime Minister departs in the UK. Another one gets ready to mount the carousel. Andy Burnham, of course, expected to become Prime Minister in a matter of weeks, barring something extraordinary. He will be, the seventh Prime Minister Britain's had in the last 10 years. I've been in the US this week talking to people, political figures, business figures, and others about the implications of yet another change of government, the implications of an Andy Burnham Labour government. Katy, you've been having some interesting discussions with prominent Americans on the topic. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, so conversations here, and then I think it's always funny. One of the things that's most struck me about moving to America, and I know, Gerard, this will not surprise you as someone who's been here for such a long time, but just how little they talk about us. Often you'll get these calls from the UK news desk. I remember around the time of Mandelson going, and it was clearly fever pitched in the UK. And they were saying, the pressure's building is leading all the bulletins in the US. And you're like, I haven't even seen it on one bulletin yet. But I think a change of prime minister is a time when you do get some questions about British politics. And therefore, I have a lot of people asking me who Andy Burnham is. Is this about Epstein still? There's some confusion about what's just happened. But certainly, even Donald Trump, for example, on Sunday, you had the president seem to pre-announce Keir Starmer's resignation when he took to Truth Social to say Keir Starmer is going. He's a great guy. Well, he's a nice guy, but he let the country down on energy and he let the country down on immigration. And just last week, I sat down with the US ambassador to the UK, Ambassador Warren Stevens, who's obviously Trump's representative. He's known for Trump for many years. He made him ambassador. And we were having a conversation at the Times CEO Summit where we hadn't quite had the Makerfield by-election, but it was that day. So I said to him, what do you think about Andy Burnham and, potentially Ed Miliband? Because if something went wrong, or could Ed Miliband be Chancellor, which is a big rumor. And this is what he said to me.
My job is to work with whoever the British government is, and so I'll do my absolute best. I obviously have I don't know Andy Burnham at all. I've never met him, but I obviously have policy differences with Ed Miliband, starting with energy. And so we've had one meeting about that, and it didn't really go all that well. So
and there wasn't a second.
There hasn't been one.
Jerry. So certainly, I think that Donald Trump had already clashed with Keir Starmer on various policy issues. I think if you did have Andy Burnham make Ed Miliband Chancellor, that is going to be an escalation, because Ed Miliband is seen as, the king of net zero, to the point that even some Labour MPs don't like it. But you've been talking to various finance figures this week about how the UK looks. What have you been picking up?
Well, I think to your point about Americans not paying much attention to what goes on in the UK, I'll just endorse that and sort of say two things, really. One, you can't overestimate the extent to which the UK does not impinge on the American public or political consciousness pretty much at all. I think it is literally true, for example, that the sort of the takeover of Boston by Scotland fans for the World Cup in the last week has received 10 times as much, maybe 100 times as much attention in the US media as in general public consciousness as Keir Starmer's tearful departure from number 10. And the second thing I'd say is you can't overestimate either the extent to which, and I'm sorry to say this as a proud Brit and an American, I'm a dual citizen, but the extent to which Britain is regarded as a bit of a laughing stock, quite frankly, these days in America. And now that's, partly because of just the sheer sort of, Monty Python-esque, rotation of prime ministers, Ministry of Silly Walks kind of stuff that we've seen, now 7 prime ministers in 10 years and just a complete chaos. It's partly because of the, frankly, the diminished significance that Britain has in sort of, particularly in military military affairs, military and sort of strategic affairs. I think, look, we don't need to get into yet another discussion about what Britain should have done with regard to Iran and US war with Iran. I completely understand why Britain was opposed to that war, and I've written repeatedly what a disastrous war it's been, so I don't blame them. But it was an interesting example, again, of just, the one, everybody remembers that Tony Blair stood with the United States in 2003. Everybody remembers that Margaret Thatcher stood with Ronald Reagan repeatedly. Kind of insofar as anybody paid any attention at all, it was Britain doesn't really have a navy, and what are they doing? And they're kind of hopeless, and and their economy is a mess. So those two things, I think, are just we should keep front and center of our minds. One, Britain does not figure politically in the American mind, and two, insofar as it does, it's regarded in a way in the 30 plus years I've been in America in a more negative and frankly disdainful way than I think Britain has been viewed at any point probably in the last 75 years. And to illustrate that, you talk about, I spoke to a couple of people this week, some senior US government officials, but also a couple of very well-known figures, should we say, in financial markets. And their focus is on policy and on the economy and just what an incredible mess the British economy is in, productivity stagnation for the last 15 years, profound fiscal problems, really long-term structural problems, massive welfare spending, high taxes. And one of them said, one I spoke to this week said, look, the British, whoever, it doesn't, who knows, this is someone who knows Britain very well, does not know Andy Burnham very well at all, had met him, once when he was a minister a long time ago, but said, look, Britain's got to go for growth. It's got to do something about its chronic economic weakness. It just, you look at Britain, you look at it from overseas, and you see this sort of diminishing economic power. You see a country that, has opportunities. People don't dismiss that. AI is a big opportunity. Artificial intelligence is a big opportunity for the UK. But even there, this person said to me, if they don't get their energy policy right, if Britain continues to have this incredibly restrictive energy policy, and if we do end up with, Ambassador Stevens there talking about Ed Miliband. If someone like Ed Miliband were to become Chancellor, I think the reaction among American investors, among financial markets more generally, unless Britain starts demonstrating that it's really serious about developing a strategy that will regenerate growth, I think Britain will just continue to sink in the consciousness of Americans generally, and in particular of American policymakers and people who make the big decisions. But anyway, we've got to call it a day there, Katy. Thanks again this week. Have a great weekend, and we'll join you all next week.